gluten-free casein-free diet is a diet that removes gluten, which is the protein found in wheat and rye and barley and a bunch of very common grains that most people eat multiple times every day, and the protein in dairy, which is casein. And so these two foods have a lot of problems. They're very inflammatory. They can create a lot of immune system reactions. They can really irritate the gut. They can cause autoimmune type reactions. They are very inflammatory and can create opiates. And opiates are those things that you find literally in morphine and heroin. Those are opiates, and we have opiate receptors where those drugs fit. But the foods, if they're turned into opiates, will fit in those same receptors. So it's basically like the same compound. So if your child's eating these foods and they're not able to break them down properly, their digestion isn't working, their enzymes aren't sufficient, and their gut is inflamed and allowing proteins through that they shouldn't get through, you have a lot of inflammation, a lot of systemic problems, including the potential of creating these opioid compounds, which can make people feel spacey and irritable and all sorts of things. So I think, you know, one of the reasons that a lot of people start there is that so many people have a problem with these foods, and it's a fairly simple, straightforward diet to do, and it provides so much help for people that it's often a really good place that people often start when they're looking at various special diets.
Let's talk about phenols and salicylates, because why are they so troublesome for these kids?
That's a really great question. Actually, this was really first discovered, I would say, in the 70s by Dr. Ben Feingold, where I am here in San Francisco. And he discovered that these phenolic compounds can create hyperactivity among a whole host of other problems like irritability, aggression, sleeping problems, all sorts of things. When someone isn't able to biochemically process these substances. And what some of the work of Rosemary Waring and others found was that children with autism have a deficiency in a biochemical pathway called sulfation. And sulfation is one of the things that processes these salicylates and phenols and various compounds. And so Rosemary Waring discovered that for people with autism. But, you know, there's a lot of very similar underlying condition, biochemical factors in these various conditions. In fact, when I first started studying, my first paper wasn't on autism. When I met my mentor, it was actually on ADHD. But in the first 5 minutes, he had 2 kids that recovered from autism, and he started going into autism, and I was totally hooked. But the point there is that the underlying biochemical imbalances are fairly similar. They're just, you know, different individuals with different severities and, you know, different combination of factors that might cause one person to have one thing and one to have another. So a lot of the principles, if I say autism, it's often principles can be very helpful for a variety of different neurodevelopmental disorders. So when we look at it, we see that these individuals have problems with sulfation. We also know, if we do a little biochemistry lesson, upstream from that biochemical process, you need methylation and transsulfuration to be working. And we know, based on enormous amounts of work with Jill James and others, that methylation and transsulfuration do not work very well also in people with these types of neurodevelopmental disorders. So you have this combination of, you know, maybe it's genetic polymorphisms and just an inability for the biochemistry to handle it. Then you add these foods, and now you get a reaction that other people don't. In fact, they're very healthy foods, things that are found in berries and grapes and apples and spices and all sorts of really wonderful almonds, all sorts of really wonderful foods. But if your biochemistry doesn't handle them, instead of being nourishing and providing lots of wonderful antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds, for you, they can be very inflammatory and create a whole host of behavioral and other symptoms.
Yeah. And what types of symptoms do parents typically see when their child's having a reaction to phenols or salicylates?
Yeah, I mean, a few of them that I mentioned are like hyperactivity is a big one. So red cheeks, red ears, and hyperactivity are kind of like the most classic ones. If I see that, that's like a huge red flag for me. But not everybody gets all of those. Sometimes people will have trouble falling asleep at night, or really energized at night, or very aggressive, irritable. I had one child that was incredibly aggressive. He wasn't even on a GFCF diet anymore. He was on a specific carbohydrate diet, but it had salicylates in it, and he was having aggressive episodes multiple times every single day, and his mom was getting very worried. Well, it turns out that for him, the salicylates were the compounds that made a huge difference. And once she took those out, then the behavior and the aggression completely disappeared. And his mother was very worried about him. You know, you can imagine all of the concerns that come with when he gets bigger and stronger, what would happen if you don't get that aggression under control. So that shows you how powerful sometimes these foods can be, and how empowering the intervention of diet can be to helping parents have tools to help their kids. The first step would be removing the foods that are causing the problem and then going from there. Now, that's a simple thing and not such a simple thing depending on to the extent for which you want to remove these. So there are a few compounds. So there's phenols, and then there's other sorts of related types of compounds broken down by similar pathways. So salicylates are a natural type of phenol. They occur in lots of the things I just mentioned: apples, grapes, berries, spices, cinnamon, you know, those types of things. But then there's also other phenolic compounds like phenolic amines, and these are typically more in things like proteins that have been processed in some way, fermented, slow cooked, something where it's releasing these types of compounds. And then there's other sort of related but slightly different things. So there's different diets that address them. There's the Feingold diet that looks mostly at salicylates. There's the fail-safe diet that looks at salicylates, amines, and glutamates. And then there's what I do, which is a combination of all of those different types of things, depending on what the person needs. So I might have 7 different strategies for how I want to remove them and how I want to test them back based on the individual person. But the child is super picky eater, and these are some of their favorite foods. I might just remove a few of those foods and pick the shorter list first, and then proceed from there and see if I need to make it more restrictive or something else later. Other people that have dabbled around and they're not getting results and they're not seeing what they want, and they're kind of real go-getters and they can make it happen because their child's more less picky, more compliant, they might go straight for the bigger list and then test back after that. So 2 different approaches.
How do we fix our children's ability to process these foods appropriately so they can add them back in?
Exactly. I think that that's a really key point, because I find that with a lot of diets, I'm not picking on any one per se, I think just generally, if we have a diet and has these subscribed rules, then we do these rules and people get better. And we think, great, you know, this is their diet, this is the diet that they need. But we never kind of think about, well, why aren't they tolerating these foods? Is there something about the gut? Is there a pathogen that is depleting the nutrients in that pathway, which is what can happen with phenols? Is there some deficiency upstream somewhere in the pathways? What is going on and how can we adjust it? And so for me, it's looking at how can I improve these pathways? How can I provide nutrients to build up those pathways and the pools of nutrients available? And how can I get rid of anything that is going to be depleting those the nutrients in those pathways, like, for example, the pathogens, and you know, healing up the gut and all those different types of things. And both of those things are important. And sometimes when people focus on the diet, they don't think about, well, how can I get off the diet? But then other times people think, well, I don't need to do the diet at all, I'll just work on the pathways. And I think that there is some balance again between the 2 of those. I think what I found most often is that I've needed to do both with most of my clients, or I found that they've done best when they do both. And then figure out when to adjust the plan as you go. Is basically taking sulfate and attaching it to various substances and doing all sorts of things, from detoxification to the integrity of the gut, to the digestive process getting kicked off, to all sorts of important neurological systems and things. So it's very important, and it needs sulfur. And so well, one of the challenges that we find is that sometimes people don't tolerate large amounts of oral supplementation with sulfur. There might be a variety of reasons for that. So I tend to find that Epsom salt baths and other ways of improving sulfate will build up that pool and give them more availability to that. There are people that do well with sulfur foods, particularly, and there are some people that can tolerate the sulfur supplements, but I tend to like the transdermal forms, whether it's a bath or a cream or something, because Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. So that sulfate provides that portion. And then lots of kids are deficient often in magnesium, so that's also a nice kind of add-on as well. So that's one thing. And then working on all the other parts of the pathways. So what else do they need? They need folate and B12 working well. And if they have certain genetic polymorphisms, they might need more of these or certain forms of them. And then when we go down into transsulfuration, we need B6 and zinc and magnesium, all sorts of other things as well. And so really, I think working on nutrient status and then working on the gut and any sort of what we call dysbiosis or pathogens or things are some of the key things that I have found that helps people reduce that intolerance that they're having, improve their tolerance. My training arm is called Bio-Individual Nutrition, because what I really discovered in my 15 years of doing this is that there is no one approach that works for everybody. And it really requires figuring out what is going on for them. I find that there is no one diet that is the right diet for the gut, and there is no one supplement or set of supplements that is the key for everybody. And that's what I think makes it a little sometimes more complicated, but much more effective in the end for parents that stick with it, put their detective hat on and really try to get to the bottom of what might be going on, get some expertise, maybe some testing, work with some people. You don't need to do that necessarily from the very, very beginning, but if you're really, if you were someone that's been doing this for a little while, that might be a really good thing to do, which is to figure out what's going on for your child. How do you address those very specific needs that they have so that they're able to improve and maybe heal the gut. Oxalates can come from the diet, or oxalates can get generated inside the cell. And if you've got low sulfate, they can it can get into the cell. If you are deficient in certain nutrients, you can produce it in the cell. If you have leaky gut, you can leak through the gut into the bloodstream and therefore now be available for getting into the cell. Once it gets into the cell, it can affect mitochondrial function. Mm-hmm. So this is a big deal. And we've known from the work of Dr. Fry and Dr. Rossignol that mitochondrial dysfunction is really quite significant and common in people with autism. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle I feel like are coming together after these, decades of these wonderful researchers doing this research. And if you want to know everything autism, that's on my website, nourishinghope.com.
Yeah.
And I think that, this might be a good time to just say one of the reasons I named it Nourishing Hope is, I want to impart the message on to parents that are listening that there is always hope, and that nourishing your child is going to help you continue to have more hope, right? You have to start with some hope to believe you can change. You start to make some changes, you see some results, you get more hope, you take more action. And all of those things I think are really valuable. And so people can find like all of the writing that I do and all of my parent learning and educational tools and things like that on nourishinghope.com. And then for practitioners, I teach a special practitioner training for professionals, and that is at bioindividualnutrition.com.